In the seething underbelly of Cape Town, South Africa, the 2000s marked a period of intense violence that would come to define the city's gang wars. At the heart of this conflict was the ruthless Hard Livings gang, led by the notorious Rashid Staggy, a figure whose name would become synonymous with gang violence, murder, and terror. The Booysen brothers, two members of the rival United Democratic Front faction, would tragically become key figures in this violent saga, their brutal executions standing as stark reminders of the bloodshed and lawlessness that engulfed the Cape Flats during this tumultuous period. The story of the Booysen brothers is not just one of familial loss, but also of a broader struggle between rival gangs, each vying for control of territory, power, and illicit income in a city plagued by poverty, systemic inequality, and social unrest. Their deaths underscored the extreme violence that defined Cape Town's gang culture, a violence that the South African government struggled to control for decades. Cape Town's gang landscape. Cape Town has long been a city divided by socio-economic disparities. The apartheid era left a legacy of racial segregation, with vast portions of the population confined to sprawling, underdeveloped townships, such as the Cape Flats. These areas, often marred by systemic unemployment, poverty, and a lack of access to education, became fertile ground for the rise of organized gangs. In the 1980s and 1990s, during the waning years of apartheid, the influence of gangs in Cape Town surged. The political unrest and economic challenges led to the proliferation of criminal organizations, which filled the void left by a collapsing state apparatus. Many of these gangs, such as the Hard Livings, the Americans, and the UDF, were involved in various criminal activities, including drug trafficking, extortion, and violent territorial disputes. By the time the 2000s arrived, Cape Town had become a hotspot for gang violence, with rival factions vying for dominance. The violence was not just a byproduct of poverty, but a means of survival for many young people caught in the cycle of gang membership, where allegiances and blood feuds define their lives. The Hard Livings gang. Power, violence, and control. At the center of Cape Town's gang wars during this period was the Hard Livings gang, a powerful and violent criminal syndicate that controlled large swaths of the Cape Flats. Led by Rashid Staggy, the gang became infamous not only for its criminal activities, but also for its brutal methods of maintaining power. Rashid Staggy, a former member of the United Democratic Front, was no stranger to violence. As the leader of the Hard Livings, he commanded one of the most feared gangs in the city. Known for their brazen tactics, the Hard Livings had a reputation for committing some of the most heinous acts of violence during the gang wars. They were involved in drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and various forms of racketeering, but their most notable method of asserting control was through terror and intimidation. Staggy, in particular, became infamous for his violent leadership style. Under his command, the Hard Livings gang employed brutal tactics to eliminate rivals, and they weren't shy about using public executions to send a message. The most high-profile and brutal example of this was the execution of the Booysen brothers in the early 2000s. The Booysen brothers, victims of rivalry. The Booysen brothers, two of the most prominent members of a rival gang faction, the United Democratic Front, had long been at odds with the Hard Livings. The UDF, while smaller in scale compared to the Hard Livings, had developed a reputation for challenging the established criminal order of the Cape Flats. This led to an escalating conflict between the two gangs that would have devastating consequences. The Booysen brothers, both heavily involved in gang activities, were well-known figures within the Cape Town underworld. They were respected by their allies, but feared by their enemies. As members of the UDF, they had significant influence, particularly in the townships, where their loyalty to their gang and their fierce resolve made them a formidable force. However, their rivalry with Rashid Staggy and the Hard Livings gang led to a tragic confrontation. The two brothers, who had been seen as a significant threat to Staggy's dominance, were targeted for elimination. In a public and highly orchestrated act of violence, the Hard Livings gang decided to make an example of them. executing the Booysen brothers in a display of ruthless power. A cold-blooded display of power. The murder of the Booysen brothers was one of the most chilling episodes in Cape Town's gang wars. On the morning of their deaths, the brothers were ambushed by members of the Hard Livings gang. The exact details of their execution remain shrouded in mystery, but it is widely believed that Rashid Staggy himself ordered the killing, viewing the Booysen brothers as direct threats to his power. The execution was carried out in broad daylight, and the brutality of the attack sent shockwaves through the community. The brothers were gunned down in cold blood, their deaths serving as a stark warning to any other would-be challengers to the Hard Livings gang's supremacy. What made the execution particularly significant was the manner in which it was conducted. Gang members were not concerned with concealing their identities or avoiding capture. The cold-blooded nature of the slaying, coupled with the public setting, demonstrated the Hard Livings gang's overwhelming confidence in their power and their belief that they could operate with impunity. This execution marked a key turning point in the Cape Town gang wars. The Hard Livings gang had taken a major step towards solidifying their dominance, but the violent nature of the killing also fueled a growing resentment among rival factions and sparked increased law enforcement efforts to curb gang violence. Escalation of violence and law enforcement response. The execution of the Booysen brothers did not mark the end of the violence. Rather, it fueled further bloodshed between the Hard Livings gang and their rivals. In the wake of the brothers' deaths, the UDF and other gangs began to intensify their efforts to avenge their fallen members, leading to a spike in violent confrontations across the Cape Flats. While the death of the Booysen brothers shocked the public, it also had a profound impact on law enforcement efforts in Cape Town. For years, the South African police had struggled to control the rise of gang violence, but the high-profile nature of the Booysen brothers' execution forced authorities to step up their efforts to address the crisis. In response, the government launched a series of anti-gang operations aimed at curbing the influence of gangs like the Hard Livings. Yet, despite these efforts, the gang wars continued to rage on. The Hard Livings gang, with its ruthless leadership and vast network, continued to exert control over large portions of Cape Town. The violence was further fueled by the illicit trade in drugs, arms, and other criminal activities, and it became increasingly difficult for law enforcement to restore order. A symbol of violence and power, Rashid Staggy's leadership of the Hard Livings gang remained a symbol of the power and violence that dominated the Cape Flats. While Staggy was eventually arrested and convicted for his crimes, his legacy as one of the most notorious gang leaders in South African history lived on. His role in the execution of the Booysen brothers and other violent acts of gang warfare cemented his reputation as a figure who ruled through fear. Staggy's influence continued to be felt long after his imprisonment, and his name became synonymous with the unrelenting violence that plagued Cape Town's streets. Even after his death in 2004, which came in the form of a gang-related shooting, the Hard Livings gang continued to operate, perpetuating a cycle of violence and intimidation that would affect generations. The enduring legacy of the Cape Town gang wars. The story of the Booysen brothers and the Hard Livings gang is but one chapter in the broader history of gang violence in Cape Town. While efforts have been made by the South African government to combat organized crime, the legacy of these gang wars endures. The cycle of violence, poverty, and criminal activity continues to affect many communities, particularly in the Cape Flats, where gang membership remains a way of life for many young people. The deaths of the Booysen brothers, along with countless other casualties in the Cape Town gang wars, serve as stark reminders of the brutal realities of life in a city divided by inequality and gang warfare. For many, the path to survival is paved with bloodshed, and the struggle for power and control continues to shape the social fabric of South Africa. If you found this video informative, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.